Hello, everyone. My name is David Leclerc. I'm the host of the ChUG podcast. This is the second installment of our series called In the Service of Cytometry, where we're going to discuss service contracts and instrument maintenance. And this second installment, I'm very excited to have as a guest, Mr. Ray Lannigan. Ray, thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David.
Really appreciate your time. Our audience will know you through Cytek and your involvement in the group and your impact in the field of flow cytometry. Before we get started, do you want to give a brief description of your career in about a minute, if you will? Just kidding. but like, give us an idea of how you got involved in flow cytometry and with Cytek.
Yeah, sure. So it was it was 1993. I was just coming out of the Navy. I was an electronics technician in the Navy. Did repairs on board ships for communication equipment and in radar, and was recruited and hired at BD to be a service engineer in New York City, where that was a great job. BD was a great company to work for. But one of the things I learned while I was there doing service contracts is that there was this hospital, Catholic hospital, where they did a lot of healthcare for needy people that couldn't afford to pay bills, and the woman that was there, this Russian woman, Eleanor, she's a very nice person. She was like a mom. She would make me lunch. And I remember one time when I was there doing a service call, having lunch, and she said, Ray, she said, I don't know if we can afford service contracts anymore. Can you maybe see about reducing the cost? Me being in my late 20s at the time, I was thinking, oh yeah, sure, I can help with this. And so at the time I went to my manager and wasn't successful at reducing the costs. And I think part of the reason was they didn't have to, there wasn't any competition. Mm. And so that kind of gave me the idea that maybe it'd be a good business idea to go out and start an independent service organization that serviced BD flow cytometers. And I did that in '99. And worked for a short time, worked with a small company in Annapolis, Maryland. And then my lovely wife, Joanne, she got a position at the University of Virginia, and we had to relocate. And during that process, I ended up going to work for Cytek. I had met Cytek through that company in Maryland. We were a distributor for Cytek, and so I got to know Eric Chase and Harvey Schulte, and actually went to work for them in 2002, and then started the service organization there at Cytek, and we started servicing the BD cytometers, and we were pretty successful, and eventually bought by Cytek Biosciences in 2015, and then I think everybody else knows the story there with Cytek Biosciences and them with their full spectrum cytometers. So that's basically my background and how I was involved in the service side of things. And during that process also, I was in charge of sales. My last job at Cytek was I was the VP of global sales. So I had a global sales team that I managed and the service. So they were together and under my management. And I got to learn a lot about global sales and global support during that time, and hopefully I can share some of my insights today about what I've learned from my career about the servicing end of things.
I'm very excited about this discussion because so far we've been talking about the problem of the service contract being too expensive, but it's always from the point of view of core facilities, and I'm really excited to have the point of view of somebody who actually was on the other side selling these service contracts and basically give us an idea of like how you think about them and basically how we can optimize the value of these things so that everybody's happy when we buy them. I guess the process gets started when somebody buys an instrument There's a life cycle to think about. There's like the longevity of the instrument. How would you define these early steps in when you get an instrument? Like,
Yeah, so something to think about when you're doing the evaluation, and for determining what instrument you want to buy. Usually, you go through an evaluation period where you're doing comparisons, you're doing demos. I think it's important when you're during that phase is to actually think about the support side of things, because if the whole life cycle of an instrument of a flow cytometer is say 5 to 10 years, you usually have the instrument within your lab up and running within the first year, right? So you have 4 to 9 years of where you're going to be in the support cycle. So the servicing part of it's very important. So the important thing to look at during the initial process when you're buying is what is the price of the service contract, and what are some of the service options that are available? What are the terms? There's usually, when you get a contract, a service contract, it says contract in that name because it's actually a contract. It'll have terms and conditions. It'll have things that the owner of the instrument is responsible for. It'll have things that the manufacturer or the contract that the service provider is responsible for. So it's important during that early phase to really, I think about what those costs are going to be. So you can kind of figure it out. You can say, all right, if you're thinking about it, say, I'm going to buy this instrument for say $200,000, and it's going to cost say $20,000 a year over 5 years. That's an additional $100,000 that I'm going to spend, and and to think about those costs up front. And we can go into some details about how to negotiate during that time. It's usually when you're buying things up front and you're paying for things all up front, you tend to get better deals. So I mean, there's opportunities there at that very early evaluation stage of the
yeah. I feel like it's something there's a contradiction, not a contradiction, a kind of a you can negotiate a better deal as you buy the instrument, or you can decide I'm going to wait out my warranty period and see if I actually need one. And you can't do both, which is a bit annoying.
Well, maybe you can.
You can?
I think that's actually another good strategy is, all right, well, let's see how things go during the warranty period, right? I mean, I think what you want to make sure is the warranty period is a good way to know how the instrument's going to be supported, right? Now, during the warranty period, you're going to get coverage from the manufacturer, and I think it's in the manufacturer's best interest during that time to make sure they put forward their best efforts. I'm sure everybody's trying through all of the calls, but and all of the time of the instrument. But that's a good point that you bring up. This could be an evaluation period. Start to look at things like, all right, well, how is their responsiveness? What is the workflow? What is the process? If I have a problem, how fast does it get resolved? How easily does it get resolved? How communicative is the provider? Is the manufacturer during the warranty period? And at the end of that warranty period, I think you still the owner of the equipment is still in a position to negotiate. I mean, you can still use, if you really like your coverage during the warranty period, you might want to sign, and you have the budget for it, you might want to sign a 5-year deal with or a 3-year deal, whatever, multi-year contract. And those are good opportunities to negotiate a better price.
Right. Price of service contract. Can we go into how they are priced? In my lifetime, so far, I've done Econ 101 twice, and I got C+ twice. I think it's a curse. So let's take this with a grain of salt what I'm about to say. But like, price of service contracts in my mind was mostly a offer and demand type thing. People will buy the service contracts at the current price. And so that's why the price is where they at. But can we go behind that veneer and discuss like why are they priced, or how would you price a service contract on a BD instrument while you were at Cytek, for example?
Yeah, so I think a big driver there was, one, to look at what is the market, what price will the market bear, right?
Right.
And I think being a third party provider at the time, Cytek provided service on the BD instruments. It was, well, how do we provide value to the customer, right? I mean, BD does great service. They have knowledgeable service engineers. They're a big company, so there's a lot of reasons, I think, for customers to feel comfortable with them, right? So at that time, we had to provide value, and a lot of it was through price. I mean, and so pricing on service contracts, is through, like, what will the market bear? And so, we were targeting at that time, I think, to be, about 25% below BD, somewhere in that range. That was kind of a target, but kind of a rule of thumb. The other thing to think about is that the manufacturers, anybody would think about, it's like, a service contract is basically, if you think about it, it's basically for, another product, right? It is, it has its cost associated with it. It has its target profit margins that product should attain. And that's another way to set price. There's some calculations. If you think about, what does it cost somebody to provide service for a flow cytometry for 1 year, let's say. Okay, so if you think about, if you do this in aggregate, you think, all right, what is there's some terms that I think it's good to be familiar with. There's something that's called mean time between failure, or MTBF, right? It's what is the mean time between failure for that instrument. Does it need a service call once every 4 months, once every 6 months, once every year? The longer the mean time between failure overall, speaks to the reliability of the instrument, right? So then you take the average cost of a service call. So let's say a service call costs $2,000 to perform on average, and that's the cost of administering the service, the labor involved with it, the travel involved, all of the administrative costs, and the parts, right? And so let's say that's $2,000 a day. It has a mean time between failure of 6 months, so it's 2 service calls per year. So that's going to be, that would be, just as an example, that would be a cost of $4,000 for the service call. Now, let's say the company at that point, and let's say they're throwing in 1 PMI in that too. And so, say the PMIs, they know they cost $1,500, or let's say the PMIs cost $2,000. So that's $6,000 cost. So if the manufacturer decides we want to make 20% profit margin on this, then they're gonna add the $1,200 to that $6,000, right? So it'd be, say, $7,200, right? So that's a basic way to calculate it. And then there's also, like I said, what will the market bear? If there isn't a lot of competition, and more can be charged, then maybe more will be charged. So I think that's why it's important. And this was one of, something I felt really passionate about being a third-party service organization at Cytek, was, look, competition is good for everybody. It's good for the people providing the competition. It's good for the manufacturers, and it's good for the customers mostly, right? First and foremost, it's good for the customers because customers have choice. And ultimately, I think that actually helps the manufacturer, because if you as a buyer of a flow cytometer, if you know you have some choices for support, that actually, I think, is a value at the time of buying an instrument, right? If you know that, you say, you know what, I'm not stuck. I won't be stuck with super high prices or just one provider during the whole life cycle of the instrument.
Yeah. One of my brain dead idea, and this is, I'm kind of curious about the risk of offering service contracts. One of the brain dead idea I had at some point a few years back was to, I know on my campus there's other instruments that are not part of my course and they pay service contracts. And so the idea was to get that money or part of it to my core, and we'd provide the same type of service, kind of acting as a third party service group. And very quickly we realized that if things go haywire, we'd scrap our budget in a matter of seconds. So what are the chances of, as you offer your service contract, that as the service provider, you might miscalculate and just start paying way too much, or like paying not covering your expenses?
Yeah, well, there's always risk, right?
Right.
I mean, on a flow cytometer, the the parts vary, right? The cost of the parts vary. So if you don't have a service contract, and let's say you have to change a UV laser, UV lasers are usually the most expensive part in a cytometer. And now maybe deep UV lasers. I'm not familiar with the price of those, but they may, yeah, they're probably more expensive. So, if you that's the risk. If you don't have a service contract and one of those expensive parts go bad, then you end up coming out on the losing end of things. But I think you have to do kind of cost averaging, right? And the situation I think you were talking about was on your campus, how many flow cytometers are there?
And good question. I think
roughly,
10 or so, let's say.
10 or so. Okay,
yeah.
10 or so. So and sorters tend to have higher maintenance costs, right? The service contracts tend to be higher on sorters. So if you took the cost of getting service contracts on all of those instruments at one institution, and you're able to do this collectively, there's a few ways to go about it. So you think about the first way is, all right, well, I'm going to work with the service provider and I'm going to do all of the instruments. We want to get these synced up so they're on the same maintenance schedule, the renewal schedule, right? That'd be one thing you'd want to do. So you'd have to if you're going to get a contract with a provider, you'd have to prorate, get some of these prorated so you could sync them up. I know when we were providing service, we didn't prorate for anything less than a year, but we would prorate for more than a year. So if you would say one of them needed a year and say 4 months, we would just charge 1.33 the amount of the cost. And so if you take this approach where you're like, all right, we're going to centralize basically the management, both the cost management, and I think there's an opportunity for the maintenance part of it too, the actual maintenance part of it, with say the core facility for all of the instruments. I've had discussions with some customers about doing this, and I think one of the things that can be done is, you say, okay, well, someone at the core facility, so you're going to manage this, right? And you say, all right, and then you go and you get the money from the individual labs. But because you're doing 10 instead of 1 or 2, you have the opportunity for bulk discounting, right? So you're going to get 10 service contracts. That definitely gives you more leverage to get discounts. Then the other part that you can do is actually go do monthly maintenance. Like you can have someone, core facility staff, go to the individual PI's lab and actually manage their maintenance. Make sure the monthly maintenance is being done, and also manage all the service that you're getting from the service provider. PMI schedules, knowing when PMIs are done, knowing when repairs are done. So that's one way to do it. And if you want to stick with a service provider and not do the self-insurance, I think is the other way you're thinking about it.
Yeah.
It's one way to do it. Now, if you're going to do the self-insurance part of it, and your administration's on board and you're able to kind of charge your own service contracts, your own policies to the individual labs, and then get a budget for that in case there's money that has to be paid out and would come out of that budget. The maintenance part, the monthly routine maintenance, that becomes very important. Tracking the PMIs becomes very important. Understanding what's going on with each individual instrument. Do you have an instrument over in Dr. Jones's lab where it's consistently clogging? There's always clogging issues, right? So you kind of become an on-site service provider in that case, where you're trying to analyze the problems and fix them before they happen again, right? So this is where good record keeping would come into play, so you can understand what the actual problems are. I think, this, generally speaking, it's kind of like it's the same. Is it really, when you talk about service contracts and you talk about like insurance policies, it's the same thing really when it comes to the financial part of it. Mm-hmm. Just like when you're buying a big screen TV and you're going to check out at the store, they ask you, do you want to buy the extended service plan on this? And you can buy the extended service plan, or what I say, self-insure, and say, you know what, if this TV just doesn't work for me, or whatever the appliance is, I am going to take the money I would have spent on this and just buy a new one, or get it fixed myself.
Right.
So yeah, but there's risk involved with that. But I think these service contracts are priced to be profitable, right? I mean, it's like I said earlier, it's another business product. So if you're willing to take the risk, then chances are it'll be lower, but not always. If you did it along with a lot of instruments and over a long period of time, you would come out ahead.
The question I've been having, and you just mentioned this as being a service, and I'm kind of wondering if manufacturers are happy with the way the service contracts are being purchased by people who owns the instrument. I'm unsure if there's a way to figure that one out outside of asking the money people at these different companies. But
yeah, well, usually usually those things are usually proprietary. All of that, what is the margins on these things? That's usually a proprietary thing. I doubt any company would tell you what their profit is, right? So, I think one of the ways you can kind of assess this for yourself is to understand if you're under service contract or you're under warranty. If you keep good records, you could go back and you could find out. And if you're getting good documentation from the service provider, you're getting detailed, accurate service reports, you could go back and say, all right, well, if I had to pay for this service call, in the service report, it's under warranty, right? Say they had to come in and change a blue laser, right? The service call should say, how many hours they spent, and you should know what their hourly rate is. That shouldn't be proprietary. They should be able to tell you what their hourly rate is if you don't have a service contract, so you can know that and budget for it. But if you take the labor and the parts and you add that up and you add up all your service calls, you can say, well, I spent, say, $20,000. A service contract would have cost me $20,000 this year, but it would have, if I would have paid for this out of pocket, I only would have spent, say, $6,000. So you can assess that yourself if you keep good records and you get detailed reports. I think that's an easy enough thing to assess.
Yeah.
But the important thing to know too is warranty period. Everything is new, right? So breakdown is less likely to happen in the first year. As the instrument ages, it's more likely that you're going to have problems with it.
I think it's the risk of buying brand new platforms. You don't have the history over how they're going
Right.
to behave in 5 years, 10 years, whatever.
Right. And the other thing too, it's important to know. It's like we were saying, the most important thing on this flow cytometers, or I say the most well, it's very important, but most expensive things on cytometers usually are the lasers, right? They've come down a lot, I think, since technology has advanced, but yeah, they can be pretty expensive. And so, understanding the mean time between failure, or the life expectancy of these lasers, is important. And if that's something to be very direct with your service provider about, because most lasers have a counter on them, a life counter, so you can know the hours that it was used. And so, let's say if you pay for a laser to be replaced, how long is the warranty going to be for?
Right.
And if you're using a cytometer 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, you figure about 2,000 hours a year, right? So it's if you get a laser that's supposed to have a life expectancy of 10,000 hours, that's 5 years, right, on average. So it's important to know that stuff. So that's another point to know too. If you are paying for service without a contract, what is the warranty for that billable call, right? I think a common one is 90 days on parts, and 30 days on labor.
Right.
That's an example of what a service provider may offer. But it's something to understand, and to it should really understand that part of it. And then the other nuanced thing is, okay, well, let's say you get service. The service engineer comes in and fixes a problem, say on October 27th, and say, or November 27th, it's today, and then say on December 15th, and there's a 30-day warranty. On December 15th, you need another service call. Well, it kind of gets a little muddy there, because, well, why do you need the service call? Is it for the same reason? Is it a new reason?
It's something during the first call got modified and caused the second.
Yeah. So that's the other thing too. I mean, that's maybe a cost that maybe is not thought about often when you don't have a service contract, is this time for management.
Right.
Because if you're going to be effective with not having a service contract, there will need to be management on the instrument users or owners. Whoever's responsible for the instrument, it's going to be management time on their part.
Yeah. When you shop around for a service contract, I noticed that there's not a whole lot of options. It's like you get one, it's like the best that they can offer, or there's nothing at all. There's few companies like formerly known as FlowDime is service. No, it's
Standard
by tools. Yeah. They do offer different tiers. I don't have in my facility. I don't know that I have other instruments that provide these different tiers. Is there a reason for that, or is there a way manufacturers could expand the type of service they can provide?
I think so. I mean, I had this idea when during my career and as the internet evolved and e-commerce evolved, I had this idea of, because I know everybody likes options, right? We all like to have options. And I always thought, like, having a menu of service contract options, like, all right, I could get, say, laser only coverage, which I think some manufacturers offer that, or I could get coverage without lasers, right? It's I always thought that would be of value to the customers, and they would appreciate that. Never implemented. I think one of the challenges around that from the provider's point of view is it's very difficult to manage. Like, let's say you of your 10 instruments you have, you said, you know what, these 5 we're going to put under premium service contract. These others serial numbers we're going to put under this modified menu type contract. Well, that becomes very it can become difficult to manage. And, there could be blurred lines there too, with, all right, well, this one's covered, this one's not covered, or this one's only covered for these pieces or these types of parts. So I think that may be one of the challenges on why there's limited options out there. I know what we did back when we were servicing the BD stuff is we came up with these 3 options. We had what we called a premium, and that covered everything. That was 2 PMIs per year, and covered all what was called non-consumable parts, which that's an important part of a contract, the consumable part of it that you should be very aware of. And then the other one, and then that was the top level. And then the other one that we had was the next level down was called the value contract. Now that was about 20 to 25% less expensive than the premium contract, and but what it had was a common insurance model here in the U.S. is to have a deductible, for automobiles. So it meant that if you had to have a service call, then you had to pay a deductible, hundreds of dollars, not a huge amount, and still had 2 PMIs. And then the lowest coverage is the PMI contract that we had at the time, and that would cover the 2 semi-annual PMI visits. And if you do decide to go with that lowest level of coverage, one of the things that can be helpful with is you're going to have the service engineer there looking at the instrument. They may find other issues that are outside of the PMI. So this is an opportunity while they're there to maybe only pay for a part if a part outside of the PMI kit needs to be changed. So you save maybe on the labor, the travel and the labor costs associated with the service engineer. So those are the 3 that I'm familiar with. But I agree. I think more should be available, and it's something I think to maybe evaluate and push for at that time of purchasing the instrument when you have a lot of leverage.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that. So, say you just bought the instrument, what are the levers you have to negotiate a better deal for your service contract, and how can you actually try to make the cost as low as possible?
So I think one of the things is to have the manufacturers really fight for your business. So evaluate more than one. If you're looking at go to 3, 4 manufacturers, if they have an instrument that meets your needs,
right.
go and evaluate everything, and be tough on your negotiating side. I think sometimes what can happen is if there's there's reasons for brand loyalty, and I think there's benefits in brand loyalty for customers, but there's also benefits in keeping manufacturers on their toes and keeping them competitive with each other. I think so. This is something to negotiate. Say, look, I'm buying the instrument. If you say you're paying list price for the instrument, maybe there's an opportunity to add in an extra year of service. And extend it out. So I would be having that as part of my negotiation during the time of buying the instrument.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
Yeah, one other thing to add there too. When you're doing the evaluation of the instrument, I think an important thing to know is the upkeep cost. What is the average upkeep cost? What does it cost? Okay, they'll tell you what a service contract costs, but again, getting back to these metrics, knowing the mean time between failure, knowing the cost per service call, that can tell you what it would cost to to service it if you weren't under a service contractor warranty.
Yeah, that's a Cyto workshop right there, by the way. Like proper tracking of your instruments. I don't know that that's being discussed all that much. It's kind of dry topic for a 45-minute thing, but
yeah, proper tracking. I think, and I think this is one way. Like in your case, we'll use your institute as an example. It's 10 instruments. Like if
by the way, it's 10 outside of my lab. Like the lab itself has 15 or so, and then there's more outside.
Oh, even better, 25.
Yeah.
So the data gets even better. But so yeah, I mean, so on those 25 instruments, if you knew like what was the service history for each of those, and this is where you've got to kind of get to databasing, right? You've got to know, all right, what is it, and things will usually be coded, right? So a trouble, there'll usually be trouble codes, like what is actually the problem? Is there no flow? Is there no events off the blue laser? Say there'll be trouble codes. There'll be part codes, and then there'll be like repair codes. So you should know, if you could database these codes and know what they are, then you can actually, for 25 instruments, gosh, over a couple of years, you could start generating reports saying, all right, well, we're seeing the mean time between failure for a UV laser at say 2,000 hours. The more data you have, and the better you record it and database it, that would be could be very useful in calculating costs. I think this is maybe a business idea for a piece of software.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Yeah. I made a mental note to point out as we discussed the negotiation for your service contract. I noticed recently that my procurement group gets involved heavily in negotiating with manufacturers. So we'll place an order once we made our decisions, and they will try to negotiate on top of that, which is quite interesting. One thing that I'm aware they're trying to do is they look at the level of money that we spent on a specific company, and if it reaches a certain threshold, they're gonna ask the company to provide an automatic 10% discount to everything, or like different parts or whatever. But the procurement group has its own levers. Like they deal with so much money, especially at the University of Chicago. So much money goes out that they're in really, really good position to negotiate.
Yeah, I remember having some of those conversations when I was a sales manager.
Yep.
Didn't enjoy them at that time.
But from their point of view, it's kind of like everybody, like the tide raise all boats. So we send tons of money your way. So help us out as well.
Yeah. No, I think
kind of works.
I think that's actually that makes sense from the institution's point of view. Why not? I mean, if they have access to all of that data about how much money is being spent with a specific manufacturer, but I think one of the things, like, what happens if they don't agree?
Right. No. Yeah.
Then it's like, all right, well, if you can't come to an agreement with a procurement officer, then they're gonna hold up a PO, and then you don't get what you need. So then, yeah, I mean, all in all, I think it benefits the institute. I think it benefits the users and budgeting on your end. So yeah, I just think if you're on the user side of that, I think it's good to have plan B or plan C in case the negotiation doesn't work out. Like all right, if they're not going to give like a straight up additional 5% off the top line of a purchase, what else can be done? And maybe this is a way where you can say, all right, well, add extra service, give us the equivalent in extended warranty, or so So yeah, I remember those calls.
Are we? I'm trying. I think I want to switch to alternative to service contract. Is there something else that we should cover before we do that?
Um, you mean switch? Talk about other options.
Third parties and self-insurance and
Let me just see. I made some notes here.
yeah, we should say this is the most professional podcast we've done so far. Ray has tons of notes, and we're kind of
Oh,
like typically I just wing it, and this is awesome.
oh, thanks. Yeah, my memory's not as good as it used to be, so I need these cues to look at to remember what I wanted to talk about. So, but no, I think we can. I think we can move on.
Right. So one of them is using a third-party service, and by that we mean something like in the US we have REMI as a group that offers service contracts. I'm actually never used them. So can you describe what they do a little bit better than I would?
Yeah. So the three I can think of for getting maintenance on your flow cytometer is one, the manufacturer, right? Everybody knows about that. You become familiar with that through the purchasing process. The other is, like you mentioned, I call these third party, I call these insurance providers.
Right.
Right, like Remy, I forget the other names. There's a few of them out there that provide like insurance coverage. And then third-party service, like what Cytek used to be for the BD cytometers. Tony Ledger has a company out in, I think he's in Oregon. My good friends over in England, FlowCell, Ray and Ian, they've got FlowCell there. Those guys are amazing. I still stay in touch with them, and yeah, shout out and a plug to Ray for all his help with the instruments for science. That we get donated instruments, and we donate them to needier parts of the world through the Instruments for Science civic mission at ISAC. And Ray has been very, very helpful in that support, in Ray and FlowCell. So, but yeah, I mean, so there's companies like that that provide service. So, so going first to talk about what you were mentioning, like Remy,
right?
That model is where, this company Remy, they're an underwriter, right? So they come in, they talk to your purchasing department, your administration, the same people that are negotiating, and they come in and they say, how much are you spending on instrument maintenance, on your centrifuges, on your flow cytometers, on your mass spec, on your microscopes, everything? How much are you spending? And if let's say if it's $10 million a year that you're spending, they'll say, well, you know what? We'll give you the same coverage, and we'll do it for $8 million. So give us $8 million, and we'll manage this. And it seems like a great deal because it's saving the institute 20%. In that case, I'm not sure how much they go under. I'm not sure how they set up their pricing, but yeah, and everything's covered, right? So it's all managed by this one company. So some of the variables in there, and dealing with some of these companies while I was working at Cytek, some of the variables in there is, what is the workflow or the process for you to actually get service? Do you have to call somebody at this insurance provider, tell them what's wrong with your instrument, then they call the service provider that they use? It might be the manufacturer, it might be a third-party service provider. They're going to call the service provider and try to arrange the service call. So now the kind of the direct link in this case is taken away because of the insurance provider. I don't think all of them do this. I think you might have, another way that they could do it is say, all right, well, you've got up to $5,000 to spend on every service call if you need it. And so you just contact your service provider, they come in and they'll take care of the service call up to $5,000. If it goes over that, then you're going to need to get approval from us, and then they have to get involved in that process. So that's another way. But so it's been my experience that was a negative thing, that having another middleman involved in the actual repair process had a tendency to slow things down, or the potential, I should say, to slow things down. I'm not sure it always happened, but the potential there was to just make things more diluted and difficult to actually get timely service. The other type of service, third-party service, like what Cytek was with the BD stuff, Flow Cell, Tony Ledger's group, there also can be great options. I think the risk there is to make sure that, one, they're a stable company, they've been around a while, they know what they're doing, and they have access to parts. So I think if you're evaluating a service company like that, you want to know these things. You want to know, all right, how long have they been in business? Can they give some references? You want to talk to other users to see what their experiences are, and how do they get parts? And it was always getting parts was when we were doing it at Cytek. There were basically 3 ways to get parts. We could go to BD and for the BD cytometers and buy parts from them. Those costs tended to be more. We could go to the same supplier that BD used for parts. Tubing is made by a general manufacturer that you can go buy it from.
Right.
And then there were other cases where we would make our own parts. We would take a part and just say it wasn't a proprietary part. There was no intellectual property on it. So you can reverse engineer it. You can, basically, in today's world, we didn't do it this way, but in today's world, you could 3D print it, right?
I was about to say, yeah.
Yeah. And so that's another way to get parts. And so those are some of the options. I think, my experience is that I thought we had a really good reputation at Cytek at providing good service. I thought that was something that we thrived on and really had a, it was important to us. We understood that, that was how, we weren't going to make it unless we did it really well. And so, I think the guys that have been around doing it for a while, like those other companies I mentioned, and Cytek before, is they've been doing it a while, then they're probably doing it well. But always good to check a reference too.
Right. Can I linger a little bit on the insurance subscriber, like the REMI type groups?
Yeah.
And we've not used that service, but a while back we had a flood in our facility and lost a bunch of equipment, and we had a third-party insurance group that stepped in to help out. And I'm not sure if that's the way REMI, like groups like REMI, would operate, but it was driving me crazy how the insurance group would basically try to find the cheapest option to make you whole. Like basically, we lost a 5 laser Fortessa, and they wanted to buy a 4 laser Fortessa from it basically just try to help you out, but without fully understanding what's going on and providing solutions that aren't particularly well appropriate for what you were doing, like essentially not fully fixing your problem. I don't know if these type of groups work like that, where they kind of double guess your solutions and then you need to negotiate with them, or is that not something that would happen in that particular setting?
Well, I think so. I think that what you're referring to is probably a loss type insurance.
Oh, yeah, right.
Remedy is more maintenance, right?
Right.
Need to be on schedules and having maintenance done. Yeah, and it really does come down to what the policy says, right? Like in the case you're talking about fire damage. So whoever holds the policy, whoever you've got your policy through, the institution has their policy through for replacing things that are lost, say in fire or through other covered events. What does the policy actually say? Does it say it has to replace with new or is it going to replace it with equivalents? So in that case, if you had a Fortessa that was, say, 5 years old, maybe if it's an equivalent, maybe they could go out to the used market and find it, this is the equivalent one on the used market, and replace it with that. So I think that's two different types of incidents or two different scenarios. One's lost through some catastrophic event. The other is meant to be a regular maintenance schedule. So, but maybe REMI does offer those types of coverage too as part of their regular maintenance schedule.
Right.
I think it all comes down to, I think, as a core director, as a user, if your administration is making the decision to get a type of insurance policy, you should understand the specific terms of that insurance policy to know what it covers. So in this case, maybe it says in the insurance policy, they just have to replace it with a Fortessa. Yeah. It doesn't specify 5 laser, 4 laser, so yeah, it's important to know those things. And I think it's helpful, if you can give that and your feedback is heard before decisions are made about the coverage of your equipment.
Yeah, try to get involved in the. Yeah. All right, third-party service providers. We've discussed them in the last couple of podcasts, especially the one with the cell sorters, where Dave Adams stumped me and asked me how many third-party service providers do I know, and I don't have a complete list. Far from it. Like, how many do you think are out there?
Yeah, good question. It varies. It depends. I mean, I think there are some where it's just an individual person. Right. Most people has a good reputation and they can go in and do service. So it is a handful that I know of anyway. So there's third-party authorized services, and then there's third-party independent service organizations, right? So there's fewer independent service organizations that I know. Flow Cell and Tony Ledger are two that come quickly to mind. The other way that third-party service can happen is through an authorized agent. If there's a distributor and they're authorized by the manufacturer to provide service within a specific region, that's another way that this could be covered. Does that happen mostly in, like, if the company is American and the service is in Europe or something like that, or? Could be. It's usually in a scenario where the install base, the number of instruments there, don't really justify having a full-time staff from the manufacturer, or it could be that, and we dealt with this too. It could be that the distributor there is so good that the manufacturer wants to keep them, like I know for Cytek stuff, Flow Cell is an authorized service provider through Cytek. So the BD stuff, I think they do independently, but the Cytek stuff they do with Cytek, that's been going on for years. And thinking of distributors, if you live in a region where you're dealing with a distributor, it varies. One of the things I learned in my last role there as the global sales director. It varies around the world how this distributorship is set up. I mean, there's places like Japan and China. There's a lot of places in Asia where you have to buy through a distributor. You just, unless you have a direct office there, right? So it's really, when you think about the distributor for a manufacturer can provide 4 types of service. One is sales, right? The other is marketing. The other is application support, and the fourth is technical support, field service support, like we're talking about. And generally speaking, I mean, they're usually a local company, so they understand the business environment there. So they tend to be really good at the sales and marketing. They know the customers. They understand the institutes tender process. They know how to look out for tenders and bid, and usually the distributors are very good at that. But they're kind of in some cases they're jack of all trades, master of none. Where they may be distributing all types of equipment, and their technical support staff, their scientific staff, their engineering staff may not be full-time experts or have enough instruments to make them really well experienced with flow cytometry. So that's something else to understand, if you're going to be, and again, this goes back to the buying process. I think anybody that's buying an instrument through a distributor should understand the relationship with the manufacturer, should understand how they're going to get support after they buy that instrument. Is it directly through the distributor? There's all sorts of hybrid situations too, where the manufacturer may provide direct support. If it's close enough, they may provide direct scientific and technical support.
Yeah.
So it's something to understand again during that initial evaluation phase.
Yeah. Is there a way to figure out? It seems to me that these groups are local, and so you might have more in the Boston area, or Tony is in Oregon, but like, is there a way to find a list of all these third-party service providers, or is that something that's what I should do this weekend? put that along.
You could always try a Google search,
right?
I'm happy to give that a shot myself and share it with you. Are these the companies that are actually going to provide the service, or are these the companies that are administering the contract?
I would go with service providers, like service contract people are easy to find.
It is pretty limited, as it's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do. You've got to kind of figure out if you're an independent service provider, you've got to have that experience and that knowledge base to figure out how to fix things.
Right.
with limited support, I should say. It is
right.
not without it, but with limited support.
Yeah.
But I'd be happy to look at that, and I can share it, and maybe whenever this gets posted, we can put it in the comments.
Yeah, great. The last option is the one we have here at the University of Chicago. Our friend Julie Auger set that up back in the days, and we never switched, which is the self-insurance proposal. So essentially we count our pennies and figure out how much service costs, and look at the cost of service contracts, and whatever makes more sense. But essentially, if you decide not to get your service contracts, it's just a matter of like doing a whole lot of work, maintenance of your instruments on your own, probably a bunch of minor repairs that you need to do, and kind of requires you to spend a whole lot of time looking at machines and figuring out what's wrong, learning a lot about them.
So shout out to Julie. Actually, when I first started, like, the idea of an independent service organization after I left BD, Julie was the first person I spoke to.
Oh, really?
First person, and she was at University of Chicago at the time, and I remember having this conversation when we lived on Long Island. I remember this conversation specifically, and fortunately, we've maintained a friendship over the years, and I've had the opportunity to reminisce about that with her, which is great. So I think one of the things to look at in this, and if I were in that situation, that's how I would do it. But it does require some business understanding, some time in getting accurate data together, and some technical understanding, right? And so, if you're doing this on all 25 instruments, I don't know if you are,
no. No.
No, just for the core facility?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is on, say, 15 instruments.
Right.
It's still a substantial amount of money. I mean, so if you've calculated out what you've saved on an annual basis, I mean, if you've done those calculations, you might be able to, I would say that, this could justify existing staff's time, right? Say if you have an operator who, and whenever we would interview field service engineers, I always wanted to know, what did you do with your hands? There was, through the years, interviewing field service engineers, it was great. I remember we hired this one guy. Well, we were interviewing this one guy, and he's a quirky guy. He came into the interview, and he was a little quirky. We did this over lunch at a hotel. We were in a city where we were going to hire, so he was a local. And so we invited him in. We were having lunch together, and he was really quirky. And I'm during the interview process, I'm starting to have my doubts. Like, how is he going to be with customers? How is he going to handle this? And then all of a sudden, he got into this conversation about how he rebuilt his transmission on the garage floor. And it's now in he called it his hoopty, but it was an old Nissan car that he rebuilt. And I'm like, all right, this guy can do the job. He knows how to rebuild a transmission. He's good with his hands. He's good with mechanics. So if you have someone on your staff that has those abilities, maybe they're a good candidate. Maybe they would find that interesting too, to actually be the primary maintenance coordinator for all the cytometers. So this could be the person that is making sure that and documenting that maintenance is being done, the routine maintenance is being done. They're the primary liaison with field service engineers when they come. They're documenting and recording all of the data, like we were talking about earlier, the specific data for that service call. This is how I would do it if I were in your position, but it requires it requires time.
Yeah.
Right. So, but once you do that, you become more familiar with the instruments, and all of a sudden now, I think this person, through this process, they'll be more familiar with the characterization of those instruments. So they may know, like, oh, if someone's going to do this specific type of experiment, and there's an option on a different cytometer, or more than one cytometer to use for that experiment, they may know, hey, the channels off the yellow-green laser on this laser or in this instrument are not working so well. Maybe use instrument B instead of instrument A. Right. So, and then once you have that information, that expertise, then I think the self-insurance way can really work out, as long as you have a process set up in your lab. I mean, it requires time, so that's going to be the cost, really, the time and expertise.
Right. I think from the top of my head, the drawbacks to the solution are you need your administration group to agree to have you keep a bunch of money budgeted but unspent, so that whenever problems occur, you can have access to it, which is, yeah. I think that was a problem at the University of Chicago initially. Like you had to convince people to let that happen. If you're a state university, my understanding is that somebody somewhere in the government might just like come and swoop in and just steal all your budget money. So that's just not, you want to spend it before somebody decides to build a road with it or something.
Right.
And there was another one, but I think the challenging part, especially nowadays where the instruments are black box-ish, is getting better understanding of what's going on. So everybody knows BD's platform because they've been around for so long, but get a Novocyte and get I guess the Aurora is fairly similar to what BD has been doing, but otherwise, like, it's kind of hard to understand. Like, if you're not familiar, if you're not an engineer, it's kind of hard to figure out what does what, and it's a whole lot of trials and errors and discussion with your service engineers to get to the level of expertise that is required to make that happen properly.
Yeah. Well, this is something else. I mean, I have in my notes here to talk about is kind of manufacturer training, service training. I think, and like you're saying, some of the modularity of the newer instruments where, back in the old days, I remember being on a Vantage with an oscilloscope and, trying to trace signals, like drop drive signals through components, sticking the probe on, looking at the signal. And, I'm not sure that, on-site service is doing that so much anymore. It might be just pull the board or pull the module out and drop it in, And so with that, with the newer technology, I think this offers a better opportunity to have some user maintenance. And so, we used to do what we called like tier 1 maintenance was just user maintenance. Like, how to change the seal, say like the ball seal on a BD cytometer or a sheath filter, some probes or something for the containers. It's like sort of the external parts, users would know how to change, and that's in the user guide. But I think to take it to like tier 2 to where, all right, well, you can actually take the panels off, you can look and see and know, like, all right, well, if I'm not getting fluid over here, then maybe let me look at this syringe pump. Let me test this syringe pump. And maybe there's a way to go into, say, the service software on your cytometer and actually do this test. Sometimes there's built-in software to do these tests. And so, I think having, that level of training could also be helpful. And then the tier 3 or the highest level would be, full-blown field service engineer. You could go and change lasers, do full alignments, basically troubleshoot the instrument from the ground up. I think even if, there was tier 2 for users, that would be helpful in a lot of ways. And I would argue that it could actually help the manufacturer, where, okay, yeah, maybe you get, and maybe this is a modified type of contract where, you get a lower cost contract that will mostly cover parts, right? But you're equipped and you know how to do a lot of the troubleshooting on your own or with remote support.
Right.
Right. And then the remote support, which keeps the cost down for the service provider, right? With technology now, with virtual and augmented reality, maybe you put on Google Lens or the what is the Facebook one now? It's called.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, you put on one of those funny headsets. So does the other person at the other end, and boom, you're seeing sort of this augmented reality, and they're talking to you. Say no, they see your hands going in, and no, that's not the module. It's the module next to it. Just pull off these 2 screws, release this catch or whatever, pull it out, and we'll test this, or we'll send you a new one, and you just put it back in.
Right.
It's so I think there's a lot of opportunities to user maintenance. I think it's just on both sides. I think if on the user side and on the manufacturer side, if there's some creativity around that and thinking about that, I think it could be made to work, because that's going to reduce downtime, right? It may take a day or 2 or 3 to get a service engineer to your site.
Just like it takes 3 days to get a PO out. So there you're like,
there you go. Yeah. And and I think if that, from a manufacturer's point of view, I'm just putting myself in their shoes. If the option was no service contract or this type of service contract, if it's priced right, I think, I as a manufacturer, I think I'd rather have the service contract revenue than not, so
right.
Even if it's a modified one. So yeah, I think there's definitely opportunities there.
Yeah. I think that provides better value to the. I said it before. I would hate to buy a service like we buy one for the mass cytometer, and it doesn't tell me anything about the mass cytometer itself. Like it basically, whenever there's a problem, somebody else comes in, fixes it, and then leaves, and I haven't learned anything. And so it's, to us, it's kind of like a wasted opportunity to learn more stuff. So having a service contract where we actually get knowledge out of it, it would be really, really interesting.
Yeah. So, I think I have in my notes here in the US, so in the US, there's what do you call it? Anti-monopoly laws, like from a long time ago, over 100 years ago. The Sherman Antitrust Act, a really old one, was meant to bust up Standard Oil, and and it's been used, and I think the what's her name, Elena Khan, I think is her name. She's the Secretary of Commerce, maybe. Mm-hmm. She's really hawkish on competition and antitrust.
Like the current one?
Yeah, the current one. Yeah. And so I did some Google searches before today and found that there's also state legislatures that are starting in the U.S. here that are starting to put this Right to Repair Act in place. And I think California has enacted probably the most consumer or customer friendly ones. And really, when it comes down to it, if you're going to buy a car, right? And this happened back in the early 2000s when I was just getting started in the independent service area. If you buy a car, you can get the service manual, right? There's no reason why you can't get the service manual. I think, and I spoke with some people at the manufacturers over the years and asked them, what is the reason why you won't sell me? We would pay for it, a service manual. And they said, well, there's proprietary information in there about, things that are under patent. And I was like, okay, well, take those out. I'm not looking to build that piece. I'm looking to fix it, right? And so, so I think, there's some legislative movement on this right to repair. It's starting to happen now with iPhones, where Apple wants everybody to bring their iPhone to a genius at the Apple store and to be fixed. And maybe you don't need to be a genius to fix an Apple iPhone, and you could be a regularly smart person and work at an independent service organization that does that, right? And but like I did this with my Toyota back in 2002. I love to work on cars, and so I bought the service manual. So if anything went wrong with that car, I always figured, if I'm going to pay someone to fix it, why don't I get the knowledge to fix it? And if there's special tools involved, buy those special tools, and that will still be cheaper than paying someone to fix it. I'll have a little fun. I'll learn something in the process. And so it happens in other industries. I just don't understand why it doesn't happen so much in the biomedical industry, And
we don't pressure enough.
And it's not as big, right? Not everybody owns a flow cytometer. Most people own cars, right? A lot of people,
right?
So there's more pressure on to do that.
How would you put pressure? Like, who do you need to reach out to if you're not happy with?
Well, I mean, I would talk to the manufacturer first,
right,
and understand why. Why, if they're not going to provide with any training, or if they're not going to give you access to service documentation, why?
Right.
And then, hear them out, see what they have to say. And maybe they will. I don't know. It depends. I mean, I didn't have much luck with it years ago, but find out why. And then if they don't, then, I might find out in your locality if there's any sort of legislation going on. Like in California, if you read this bill, in fact, I'll put this up on the in the comments on the YouTube page.
I'll see if I can do some editing and put it up.
Okay,
that'd be great.
Yeah, the links here in the notes that I shared earlier. If you if you talk to a local legislator or find out who sponsored some of these bills that are actually in process, talk to them and just see, or talk to their office and see what they say. I mean, I might try that route or write to them and see what they say. But yeah, I just think, my philosophy on any of this stuff is, if you bought it, you own it. You should be able to choose how you're going to fix this.
Yeah.
This happened. There's another thing that happened to us. This was a while ago, and we tried to buy a circuit board, and in trying to buy the circuit board, the order was stopped, and then they got back to us and said, we can't do that. You're going to have to pay for installation too. And that specifically is not legal. I mean, that is, that's called a tie-in sale, where you try to tie a service to a product. So, and I think maybe whoever said that wasn't aware, but it quickly was changed, and we got the circuit board, so, but anybody listening, and this is United States law too. So, if you're listening someplace else, you might have different laws, but I would find out. I mean, I look at it like, if you own this flow cytometer, if you want to buy a circuit board, then, or anything, you don't have to choose to install it. You can keep it as say as a spare part, say if you wanted to do that, so.
Because we run that into that specific problem all the time. We're going to try to buy a spare part, and it's just not available for purchase without an actual service call where we need the service engineer to show up. And so, yeah.
I would challenge that.
Yeah.
Because that seems like, I mean, one of the things you might want to do at your institution is just put that to the legal department, see what they say.
Yeah, well, yeah, our legal department is, I don't know if they're busy, but whenever we put something on their desk, it's going to take a while, but yeah, might as well.
Yeah, I just, to me, it's kind of like, I just think, people should have choices. They should have choices of how they want to fix something after you own it. You shouldn't be locked in.
Yeah. Looking at your notes and trying, like, we're running out of.
We're getting to the, we've talked a lot about this stuff here.
Yeah.
So maybe we can talk about when you do have a service call.
Right.
Yeah. So, I think, through all the years in training service engineers, we tried to teach best practices. And, the best outcome of a service call starts with just good communication between the service engineer or if it's done through a help center, through the remote help, whoever's doing the support, just good communication. So you understand what the assessment is, what are the next steps, what are the timelines. In training service engineers, I always, would say, look, when you make an appointment with a customer, try to give, a window, maybe an hour window. I'll be there between 10 and 11, say.
Right.
It's because sometimes there's variables with traffic. But if you're going to be there at 11:01, you need to call the customer and let them know that you're going to be a minute late. It's just keep them updated on the process. And then when you're there, when the service engineer is there, I always thought it was good practices to always have really good housekeeping. Like, you don't want to make a mess of a lab. You don't want tools everywhere. You don't want everything else. Everything should be organized. And I think, my assessment is, if someone is working that way, where they're just within a mess, I would grow a bit concerned is maybe they're a bit disorganized, and maybe they're, it would make me question what they're doing even more. So that's something else to look for. And I've always tried to train, look, just continually keep your workspace clean and organized. And they're in someone else's space, right? And so you have to be respectful of people trying to get by, and so, especially too, if you're going to talk on the phone, get remote help. Sure, to just kind of not make it too loud and not be disruptive in general, right? So I think a good service engineers will do that. And then, from a user's point of view, I think users want to know, how long is my instrument going to be down? When is it going to be ready? Especially if you've got people backed up waiting to run experiments, right? Yeah. You want to know. And I think that's really hard, can be hard for a service engineer to predict that, because if they're just getting there, they might not know the cause of the problem yet, right? So they have to find the cause, then they have to correct it. And so I think from the user side, just be really flexible and not put too much demand. I've been in situations where going into labs and you go in and you say, well, the instrument isn't fully down, but there's a problem. And, the customer would say, well, I need the instrument up by noon. I've got users coming in at 1.
Right.
And I'd say, well, then doing the repair fully and correctly is not as important as you just getting someone on here at 1 o'clock. So I need some flexibility here, and certainly the service engineer should be updating the customer with the progress.
Yeah.
If the service engineer gets to a point where everything's fixed and all they're doing now is running the QC, they can say, look, I expect no more than an hour or whatever it's going to take them to wrap things up. Yeah. The other thing is during that, so I would always teach the service engineers too, when you think you're done, give yourself another hour so you can just sit down with the customer and explain what you did. Go over what was wrong, how did you diagnose it, what did you do to correct it, and what is the outcome of the QC? And additionally, does the customer want to run any biologicals to check their experiment? Do they want to look at, do they still have cells from the experiment where they found the problem? Do they want to run it to see what it looks like?
Yeah.
So I think it's always good. I think it's a best practice for a service engineer to give themselves that amount of time to communicate with the customer.
Yeah, it goes both ways as well. You as the manager of the lab, you need to be around and make yourself available to the service engineer, because at some point, if you're not there and service engineer is just sitting around, he's going to leave and you won't get. So you need to make time at the end to don't let the service engineer leave without that discussion, because it's a wasted opportunity.
I agree. I made the mistake early on where I was in a hurry. I wanted to get home for my daughter's violin concert. I remember, and it was, and that was very important to me, and I was in a rush.
Right.
And I made the violin concert, thankfully, but gosh, if I just would have sat down with the customer and had that conversation, I wouldn't have to go back the next day, because as soon as they ran their experiment, they saw the existing problem. I didn't fix it properly.
Oh, right.
And so I thought I did, but they still had questions, and so I had to go back. And so, yeah, I think it benefits the customer and the service engineer to just take that time to wrap things up.
Yeah. I would also try my best to shield the service engineer from my users. Block the instrument. Don't let the users waltz in and ask questions, because at that point the service engineers has to deal with a bunch of different people, and he might not be aware of who's who needs to get proper answers, and then just dilutes the attention span that you might have to. So
yeah, it could be disruptive on the service end too, if they're trying to focus and yeah. Well, that's another thing too I always taught is focus on what you're doing.
Right.
Don't be checking your phone so much. If you get calls and you're really into something, call people back.
Right.
You don't have to take unrelated phone calls during your troubleshooting process. It's Yeah, it's best to stay focused.
Yeah. I guess I want to plug the Fix Your Flow Depot as we finish up our discussion. This is kind of a bad idea overall. Let a bunch of people with very little. Well, I mean, it's core, like people like me who have learned on site, playing around with the instruments, teach others how to do stuff. Like I didn't receive any proper training. I just do stuff that seems to be working, and then we provide a video that we upload on YouTube, and people can have access to this. And so the general idea with the Fix Your Flow Depot is to generate this bank of tutorials generated by anybody in the Flow Cytometry world, and let people judge the quality of the video by using, thumbs up, thumbs down, comments, and try to find better solutions. It's kind of the alternative to if the manufacturers of the instruments will not provide the training, then that's, I guess, the best like plan B we can hope for, is to like organize ourselves and share the knowledge that we gather individually in our own labs, and put it out on YouTube.
Yeah, I've looked at a couple of those videos. Those are pretty good.
Yeah.
And I think there's also an opportunity to get, with these videos, to get feedback from other people's experience doing the same thing. Like doing a monthly clean on a flow cytometer. I found that varies.
Oh yeah.
People do it differently. Some people use 1 or 2% contrad. Some other people using 10% bleach. Some people, do you use sheath or do you use water on an analyzer, right? I mean, it's, and it's, there's a lot of variation. So it's good to put it out there and have people give their feedback, because then you can learn what they've learned from their doing it their way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's, and I think the other thing too that is a good centralized location is the Purdue list.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't looked at it much lately since I'm retired now. But I remember when I was working it, I used to read it all the time. And, if someone was on there and they were, had an issue that, I could deal with or help with, I would do it. Usually directly, but sometimes if I thought it was beneficial to share with the whole list, I would do that too. But yeah, I think that's another good outlet to do this.
Yeah, I think the Purdue list remains the most useful tool we have available. It's like it reach everybody, and it's so nice. So
yeah. I wonder why that hasn't. Well, it's got the archives there, but yeah, I think But I think having these videos, these kind of videos, because this is how I learned to do other things in my life.
Oh yeah.
Is to how do you install? I did this weekend. How do you install a handrail with concrete steps? So I watched a few videos. To fix my coffee machine, I've got a Jura, one of these nice. I love this thing. It's an automatic coffee machine. Makes beautiful cappuccinos with a press of one button. But I basically don't. The reason why I fix this is I don't want to lose that machine for any more than a day. And so I order the parts online, watch the YouTube videos on how to fix it, and then fix it. And it's surprisingly like a flow cytometer. Right. It's got fluidic system in there, no lasers, but it's got a fluidic system in there. It's got the coffee grinder and everything. And it's so these videos. I mean, I think you can find out how to fix most things on the on YouTube. So why not flow cytometers?
Yeah, there's a couple of videos where they actually take flow cytometers apart, but nobody is trying to fix any. I think I've got pretty much everything that was generated on the channel.
Mm-hmm. Something else too, that if you're not familiar with, and let's say you have an instrument and you want to just take the covers off of it, you might need some help doing that. I'd be careful doing that if you're under service contract or under warranty. Sometimes there's a label on there that you void a warranty if you take the covers off. But
Yeah, those little stickers.
Yeah, those stickers. Yeah. So, but if you're not under warranty and you're trying to do maintenance yourself, then you might have to have access to this stuff, especially if you're going to do remote troubleshooting.
Yeah. The one thing I think is happening is it's kind of time consuming, somewhat difficult to generate a video. So I'll point out that if you email FixYourFlowDepot@gmail.com, we'll be there to help out. We can take whatever raw material and stick it in a way that's going to make something interesting to our people. So don't hesitate to email. Last question I have for you, Ray, is as the discussion continues elsewhere, the Purdue list, people mention writing a letter to the editor, doing a Cyto workshop about the topic of service contracts and so on. In your mind, what's our North Star here? What's the guiding principle that all of these actions should aim at? What's the
I would say that, like we talked about, having options.
Mm-hmm.
What I understand, businesses are in business to make money, right? I mean, that's the reason why they're there. And one of the reasons, another reason is, could be to, promote science, and I'm sure, and they're doing that. They're doing both of those things, right? Most of the companies. But, I think having options, as the owner of an instrument, being able to choose who you get to fix your cytometer, whether it be the manufacturer, a third-party service provider, or yourself, I think, I would shoot for those goals. I think, and there's like we were talking about, the right to repair bills that are moved through state legislatures here. I think there's some momentum in other markets, consumer electronics, the auto industry, for this to happen, and it has happened in a lot of cases. So, I would go in that direction, and also, to think about. I don't have the answer, but I mean, you mentioned this earlier. It's like, who would be the organization that could help collectively, right? Is it ISAC? Maybe it's ISAC.
Right.
Maybe it's the core directors group at ISAC, since there's a big stake in maintenance for shared resource facilities, right? And this could happen not just in flow cytometry, but it could happen across the biomedical instrumentation industry in general.
Right. Yeah.
I think to me, it just makes sense. It just seems fair, and maybe fair is not the right word. Just that if you own something, you should be able to choose how to fix it.
Right.
That's so. But yeah, I would push in that direction.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much for your time. It's been an awesome discussion.
Yeah, it was a great discussion. Thank you for the invitation. I enjoyed talking about this, and I'd also like to just thank a couple people before I go. One, my lovely wife, Joanne Lannigan, who I'm sure more people in the flow cytometry know her than they know me. But she's been through the years great support, a great teacher, and just a wonderful partner through it all. And also Eric Chase, who's retired now, but he started Cytek back in 1990 and was one of my biggest mentors through my whole career. And of course, Ray Hicks too. I mentioned him earlier, but he was also a great teacher. Learned a lot through him. And there's many others but Wenbin Jiang at at Cytek is also great, great teacher, great business guy. Not only a great physicist, but a really good business guy too, who I learned a lot through him. But yeah, thank you so much for the.
Thanks so much, and thanks for our viewers for sticking with us. Leave comments in the thing below. It's lonely on YouTube, and we'll talk to you later.